you are in my sphere of influence. I have something to share with you. Business leadership kind of thing. And so the way that it works is that you kind of picture who you want to reach out there, kind of the unknown everybody. So for me, it's like everybody already. But I don't actually have contact with them. And so if I focus my attention on them out there, I'm going to be ineffective because I don't have any contact. So the sphere of influence is to start with me, with yourself, and say, who do I have influence over? And I have to focus my attention there. Because if I try to influence somebody I don't have contact with, I'm not going to get anywhere. However, as a bishop, I'm responsible for them. And so this is exciting for me because this is an example of I have a responsibility and a desire for students on campus, but I'm not in contact with them. However, you are. And so being here means that now you are in my sphere of influence. I have something to share with you, and that you then have contact with those students. And so you are the bridge for me to have contact with them. And so the sphere of influence can have many, many layers. And so we have to be clear who I influence, and then who can they influence, and then as it expands, then we can be more effective. So I can think, for example, like students in our Catholic schools. I don't have direct contact with the students. The teachers have indirect contact with them, but I don't have contact with the teachers either, really. What I have is contact with the superintendent. And then the superintendent works with the principals, and the principals work with the teachers, and the teachers work with the students. And so this is exciting for me because you are this bridge for me to be able to reach into this area that I have responsibility for, but I don't have direct contact with. So I tell you that in part to kind of set up what we want to discuss. But before I get into that, I was thinking about coming to talk to you, and some of you may be familiar. There's a podcast that started as a TV show on EWTN and now is also a podcast called The Journey Home. Have you ever heard of this? So The Journey Home is a weekly hour-long conversion story. So the host just says, tell me your story, and then once in a while he'll ask questions, and for an hour this person tells why they became Catholic. So it's very interesting. And I've been listening to it for a few years, bless you. And one of the things that struck me is how many people's journeys start in college. How many people's conversion stories starts in college because it's the first time they're away from home, the first time they're kind of engaging the world on their own terms, the first time maybe that because of a certain freedom, they're getting themselves into serious sins and serious problems, and so trying to wrestle with that. And so it just strikes me how many times I hear people tell their story and how significant college is for that. I want to emphasize that to again say how important this is that you're here and how excited I am. However, I also will give you a little bit of caution because usually in those conversion stories, college is significant. However, it normally still takes years. That most people don't just encounter the truth and change. What happens to most people is they encounter the truth, they come to know Jesus, but then we come into conflict with all the stuff that makes up my life, all the points of resistance that are just part of life. And so in many of these conversion stories, it takes years before they actually take that step. However, when they look back, they realize they would have never gotten to that point years later if not for the exposure that they were given in college. And so this is crucial. Now, in the work that I did in the deaneries, there were 3 basic points that I asked everybody to look at. So we had the baseball diamond, okay, and if you're not familiar with that, you're going to talk about it more, so I won't go into the explanation other than to say that the idea of the baseball diamond is one that it captures a progression in the life of faith. So what happens is there's a progression from like no faith at all to becoming a person of faith and growing as a person of faith and then becoming somebody who takes responsibility to share faith with others. Like that's the progression. And that's what we're after in our lives, is that we want to go from nothing or wherever we might start, to a mature faith, to being willing to share that faith with others. So that's the whole picture, but that takes time. And so it's good as an image because it captures that there's a progression, and it captures that in this baseball diamond, there are people at every possible stage. So you're working with people at every stage. So it can help identify, like, well, where are people? And it can help identify, we have limited resources. There's only so many of us. We have other responsibilities. There's so many hours in the day. So we can't do everything everywhere all the time. So we have to decide, well, where are we and where are we most effective and where are these people so that we can better target what we're doing. Okay, so that's the baseball diamond in the quick nutshell that you're going to explore more. I tell you that because what I shared with people when you look at all of this is that it makes sense, but it can feel overwhelming because it can be so much. And so there's three things that I want to emphasize for you. Okay, the first is that you need a strategy. So the problem in many cases is that we don't have a strategy. So whether it's a parish or whether it's a campus ministry, whether it's a diocese, we come across some good thing and say, let's try that. Well, that may not be the thing we should try at all, and that's not a critique of the thing. There's lots of programs out there, lots of books out there, lots of approaches out there that all have merit, but it's not just the question of is this good or bad. Strategic means how does this fit what we're trying to do? Okay, that's the strategy part. Not just is this a good program or is it bad. There's lots of good programs. The question is, how does this program fit what we're trying to do? So what is our strategy? And that question is one, unfortunately, too many places don't even ask. And so then they try a good thing, and then they are frustrated with the results because we presume if it's a good thing, it will give good results, and that isn't always the case. And it's not a critique of the thing, it's a matter of how does it work at a certain point in our lives. And so just think of your own journey of faith. There are things that are very effective to help you now, like being here, whereas a few years ago, if you had come to this, it wouldn't have helped you. And other students on your campus, if they were to be here today, this wouldn't help them because this isn't what they need now. And it's not even a criticism of them, but it is a matter of we have to have a strategy that can better account for where are people and what do they need at this moment. That's again why the baseball diamond can help. The other part of the strategy, the second part of the strategy, is that we have to switch in our brains from thinking about whole groups to thinking about one-on-one. So if you want to have an effect on the campus, that's not going to happen by trying to communicate with the campus. It's going to happen by communicating one-on-one with other students that are in your sphere of influence that you actually can talk to. So we have to plan. Our strategy has to focus on maximizing one-on-one encounters. So if we try to, so this is a big problem in parish ministry. So what happens, unfortunately, is a parish decides we want to have this thing for everybody. So they organize something at the parish, they bring in a speaker, they plan a retreat, they do all the things, they publicize it, they invite everybody to come, and then who comes? Either almost nobody or the same people that always come to everything. And the reason that fails is because most people aren't ready for that. And the approach is invite everybody and let's have a wholesale transformation. That just never happens. Even in a big, powerful experience, like going to a retreat, you know, whether it's a Steubenville retreat or a seat conference or these kinds of things, you have these powerful experiences for this big group. And so you can judge it as, well, that was really good. But the measure is, when everybody goes back, then what happens? And almost always the ones that have a transformation are ones that came into contact one-on-one with somebody as part of that experience. Not just, I had a big, powerful moment. So we need a strategy. We need a shift toward how that strategy maximizes one-on-one encounters. And then the third part of the strategy, the third part of the starting point, is that we also need to start with who is closest, typically. Who is closest? So how do we take the people that have taken steps in maturity and strengthen their experience so that they become fellow workers in the vineyard? Okay, so if we try to launch an effort to reach the people that have the least amount of faith, that's not likely to be successful, even though we typically think of them like, who can we get that's so far away? And there'll be examples where we do connect with them, but almost always it's because there was some experience that put me one-on-one with that person with enough time that I could actually be an influence. But if we target those people that don't go at all, so again, a parish. If I'm a pastor of a parish and I'm targeting the people that don't go to Mass, well, they're never hearing me. No matter what I do, those people are oblivious or indifferent to whatever I'm doing. And so it won't help for me to come up with a strategy to reach them. What I have to do, because of the spheres of influence, is I have to come up with a strategy for the people that are closer, because the people that are closer do have contact with them. So as an example, in a parish, there are lots of Catholics in a parish that don't go to Mass at all. They don't go to anything. But if the parish has a school, probably a lot of them send their kids to the school. So that an area of contact with the non-practicing is the sidelines of the soccer field. Parents who do go to Mass are standing shoulder to shoulder with parents who don't go to Mass. So as a strategy with the sphere of influence, I have to help form those parents that do go to Mass so that they think in terms of one-on-one contact, and when they're in that one-on-one contact on the soccer sidelines, they feel confident to share their faith. If all that happens is we invite those parents to come to something at church, they don't ever come. Okay, so this is part of the strategy then. And these are the 3 points I've shared with the parishes. Have a strategy. Make sure that it has a one-on-one focus, and that the people you're working with first are the people closest. Then you can reach through those people to their points of contact that you don't have access to. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Now, I know that part of your work this weekend is to talk about the Transcendentals. So the idea of a transcendental, you know what the word transcendent means, right? Something that's bigger, something that we perceive as much bigger than me, that has some amazing source there. And so, of course, we would say that God is the source of those transcendents, but that people don't equally awaken to the transcendent in the same way. And so certain things move us differently. And so certain people are really taken by a beautiful sunset, for example. Other people are taken by a really strong argument. You explain to them a truth and they make sense of it, and that's what shows them there's something more. So the 3 transcendentals traditionally are truth, beauty, and goodness. And so these are 3 ways to describe when someone has an experience where they instinctively feel, I'm in contact with something bigger than me here. So the person who is moved by the transcendental of truth is the person convinced because an argument seems very sound. And if somebody is moved by that, they get very frustrated when someone else isn't moved by that. Like, how can you not see? Because in today's world, we can make the case where somebody will even concede, yes, you're right, and still not care. And the reason that happens is that the transcendental of truth does not move them. It's not a fault. It just accounts for that personality matters in them. So then, someone moved by beauty is someone who now they experience this reality of God present in a way that moves them, but someone else is not moved by that. So here's an example. Often people who are truly moved by beauty are very creative people, the artist kind of person. So as a contrast between the truth and the beauty, imagine, so I am someone also moved by truth. And I am an art fan, so I love to go to a museum and stand in front of a painting. And when I do, what moves me is learning all the little symbolism that's kind of in the corner of the picture, and knowing something about who the artist was and what it was that brought them to create this painting and what it is that it conveys. And so it can seem like I'm moved by beauty, but in fact, what moves me is how this expresses truth about concepts. Okay, the faith is conveyed because this symbol points to this truth. A person moved by beauty, they come up and they look at that painting and they don't care who painted it. They don't care the story of how it got painted. They just melt on the floor in front of it because they are so moved by beauty. So then the other one is the example of goodness. People are moved by goodness. And that is usually where they see some kind of charity in action, where they are moved by watching a heroic person care for another person. So to contrast beauty and goodness, someone moved by beauty can walk into a Gothic cathedral and literally swoon as their eyes are taken up into the beauty of this architecture. Like they sense God because this place is so magnificent. A person moved by goodness walks in there and say, if we had spent all this money on caring for the poor, that would have served better. Because that beauty doesn't move them. And the person moved by beauty is saying, well, if we spent the money on that, we wouldn't have this place. And so we can misunderstand each other. And so the person moved by goodness is the person that sees Mother Teresa working for the poor and is ready to upend their entire lives and follow that example. So in all three cases, truth, beauty, and goodness, people realize there's something bigger and it's powerful enough that it draws out of me a reaction. And so that's part of being human. But if we're going to have a strategy for evangelization, we have to account for the fact that people react differently, that different transcendentals move different people. And so we need to know what moves me, each of us, we need to be aware of that. And then we have to have a certain caution because we tend to overgeneralize. Because I'm so moved by this, I'm convinced that you should be too. And that's doomed to fail. Because it doesn't account for the fact that God is expressed in this variety of ways. And God is fine that an argument doesn't convince somebody. God is fine that a beautiful cathedral doesn't move them. God is fine even that somebody isn't transformed by a missionary experience. God is simply trying to pull every person into the experience of God. So these are part of what you will reflect on more, and as a strategy, you have to be aware of that. So you need to know yourself, and then you need to learn to kind of track what's happening with other people. So to create a strategy for a ministry, one of the things to ask yourself is how can we create experiences of truth and beauty and goodness? And when we provide an experience of truth or goodness or beauty, then we have to pay close attention to the people that come and what is their reaction. And so if we have a mission project, like who really seems drawn into that? And if someone isn't, well, we don't need to try to convince them that they should be. We need to take the people closest, again, that strategy, and say, okay, we have to show them that what they felt in this work of charity is. So we have to help them see that what they feel is coming into contact with God. Okay, that's the part they don't realize. So I think about this with confirmation for teenagers. So many teenagers will say that their favorite part of confirmation prep was the service project. What that tells me is that they're moved by goodness. Where I think we fail is that we don't bridge the gap for them. They feel this contact with something greater, but they don't realize that's God. Because in their minds, at their age, they have too narrow an understanding of God. And so they think that God can only be encountered by going to church. And they don't realize that this experience, this is part of contact with God. And if they can come into contact with God through what moves them, well, it can open the door to better appreciate going to church. So it's not a one or the other. It's not that, okay, I just need that. It's that I experience that. I become aware of God at a deeper level, and I'm drawn into the whole life of the church. And so this is how people are moved. Now, I think that most people, in general, are moved by goodness. More people seem to be drawn to heroic charity than they do to beautiful cathedrals or sound kind of arguments. However, in the church, I think there's an over-represented group of people moved by truth. So people that study theology are often moved by truth. And so we try to convince other people about the truths of what we believe. However, we often fail because the majority of people don't think like that. And so in our strategies, we have to pay attention to what is moving people. Okay. Questions at that point? Does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you say that there's a number of people who, as they get into their faith, they have a desire to be the person who is moved by truth? So like they start kind of going to like the groups?
No, I don't think that.
Okay.
I think they don't care.
Well, I'm specifically referring to the people who, I've noticed this in like some like Protestant circles, because Chase has brought me to a couple of those groups where like they'll come to like groups on campus to learn more, but they're not like, in a way they don't seem to be moved by the arguments, but like they almost have a desire to be the person who is moved by the arguments.
Okay.
You want to learn more, but it's like you can learn more. It's like, are you?
Yeah, so then I would say in that case, they're chasing after something that won't work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think they might see that. I think what you're saying is true in the sense that they might desire that,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's not them, it's not going to work, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a good example in terms of, like you mentioned, these guys, right? So maybe they say, you know, I want to know the truth, and they seem like they want to know the arguments. However, when you give them the sound arguments, it doesn't change them. And then you're frustrated, like, well, why isn't it working? And then we try to come up with a better argument. And I would say that even though they might say they're moved by that, they're probably not. I don't think we change, really. I think that's my point when I say no. We don't really change. So we can think that's what we should do, but then it doesn't work for us. Okay, so I can tell you, like for me, a huge part of the experience of young people in particular, but really the whole church, is the kind of mission trip experience. You know, every summer in this diocese we have plunge, and so these teenagers go and they volunteer with the poor, and they have these powerful experiences. Okay, so my entire life I've been going on mission trips, but I have never had that experience of like, okay, I need to abandon everything and serve the poor. Like, I see the value of that, and I should participate in that, but it doesn't move me the same way. Whereas somebody else comes back and they're like, I'm selling everything I own. Okay, so it's not that we shouldn't expose to them, and we should, as we grow in faith, we should appreciate all of them. And so maybe I'm not powerfully moved by the arguments, but I need to know the arguments, because if I come into contact with somebody who is moved by them and I'm not prepared to answer, well, I'm not serving that person well. Okay, so that's why we provide the different experiences. And if I'm not, see, we can get things wrong because we say, I'm not feeling it. Well, just because I'm not feeling it doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. And so even like adoration, like there's some people that are just not feeling it. Then they look at somebody else and they're like lost in time because they're in adoration, right? Well, it doesn't mean that needs to become the primary point of your faith, but it should be a part of your faith. And so a mission trip, I should serve the poor. Jesus demands that I serve the poor. And so I have to do that. But if it doesn't move me the way someone else does, that's okay, right? Like that's just not going to be the thing for me, but I should do it. So someone not moved by the arguments isn't therefore free from thinking about the arguments. They still need to know them.
So with that, when you were talking about it, it reminded me of what you were saying earlier about how you love art, but
Yes.
because you see the truth
Yes.
in art.
Right.
So would you say that as a person matures in their faith, in a way they begin to appreciate the other transcendentals through the lens of the transcendental that they like?
I think partly
connect
yes.
with the most?
However, I think that's more true for truth people.
Okay. Because I was like, that seems to work with truth and like with beauty.
Yeah,
people,
but
it's hard to
I
see
think
the
it
difference.
only works for truth people.
Okay.
Okay, because truth people are operating in the level of concepts.
Mhm.
And so when for me to say, I get it, that a mission trip is important. The reason I get it is because the concept that's true is Jesus teaches it and I should do it. So the reason I'm moved by that is still truth.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm not moved in the realm of the concepts, if I'm moved by goodness, I don't reach the point where I think I should know more truth. That very phrase is a truth concept. Okay, so I've found this difficult because as I've come to understand it, that I've had to question, okay, well then how do we help somebody moved by beauty to experience it? And when I ask someone who is moved by beauty, how do we do this? They have no idea. Because they don't think in concepts. Okay, they can't explain their own experience. A truth person has to come along and explain their experience for them. Okay, so you take a mystic, if you're reading the saints, a mystic comes into this experience of God that is truly transcendental, but they can't explain why. It takes a theologian to look at them and say, well, this is what's happening in them. And that's all true and that's helpful, but that's not their experience. So I think what you're talking about is only true for truth people. That other beauty people, for example, they can be smart. Like, I'm not saying they're not smart, and they could get the arguments, but they're not going to appreciate as much why that matters.
And this might be kind of touching on that, but I, growing up, just couldn't care less about art, couldn't care
Right.
less about music, classical music or anything like that, just kind of whatever, stupid. But ever since encountering Christ, that's changed. So I think it's incredible. I think good art and good architecture is
Right.
beautiful. Before I was a practical person, I wasn't not to sound a communist, but just whatever works, whatever is functional.
Utilitarian.
Yeah, utilitarian.
Right. Part of that's maturity.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that we grow up, right? And so there are things we appreciate when we get older. Food, for example, there's food we don't care about at all when we're little kids. Just give us, our chicken nuggets. But then as we get older, we appreciate more things. Partly that's maturity, but it is partly personality too. And again, I think the truth personality does appreciate these things, but it still is because of the concepts they convey. And that's really hard for truth people to not see. It's that concepts don't move everybody.
Do you think men on average are more truth people than they are good or beauty? Or
I don't know.
Really
I think most people are goodness, regardless of men or women. More people are moved when they see heroic charity than they are by arguments or beauty. So I think there's a huge tip in the scale toward goodness in general, for men, women, everybody. Okay, that's, if you just watch people, that's what they appreciate. Okay, but if you look at the history of art, there's way more men artists than women artists, in terms of the master works over the centuries. And so it varies. So I think you're going to find it more in kind of the profession than you will on the men or the women's side necessarily.
profession?
Meaning, being an engineer versus being an artist, that kind of a thing, So certain professions attract people that think a certain way. that find value in life according to a certain transcendental. So it's fascinating to think about, but in terms of the strategy, really it's just we have to account for it. And then as you're making plans, you have to ask how do we expose people to it? And then how do we bridge the gap so that they realize what's moving them is God? Yes.
Practically, how can we do this on a campus level when we don't have as much time to have
Right.
deep conversations?
Well, part of it is you do bring people together, right? And so what do you do when you bring those people together? And so it could be that you have an opportunity to kind of lay out the arguments, to respond to common misconceptions. Another can be that we try to draw into beauty, that in terms of beauty, no one has supported creativity more than the Catholic Church has. And so to take something that's a religious painting, and just kind of sit with it, not overly explain it, because if we overly explain it, we're shifting back into the truth part. Again, it's not bad, but we're trying to discover what moves people. And when we see someone moved, then we try to help them see what you're experiencing is God. This beauty reflects God. And so it could be a painting. It could be, in classical music, there are certain pieces of music that are specifically religious. And so there's masses, for example, a Mozart mass. And so to just listen to that. Because it'd be interesting in a gathering if you were to just take a few minutes and say, well, let's listen to a part, in these classical music masses, the Gloria takes like 10 minutes, right? So let's just listen to a Mozart Gloria. And then watch the crowd. Because you'll see the ones that are like, is this ever going to end, But then you're going to see other ones that are just like drawn to it. And then you already provide opportunities for goodness in terms of service to the poor, mission trips, those kinds of things, right? So you're already providing them. I would say that the difference is that you should pay closer attention to who reacts how to which. And then maybe you could, as time goes, you could kind of allow there to be some separation of experiences. When you bring people together, you don't all have to do the same thing every time necessarily. How could we create where we come together? So we have the social communal part that we come together for, food and drink and conversation, whatever, games. But then part of it is that we have these multiple experiences that people could participate. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then if you're thinking one-on-one, then you always have opportunities. No matter how limited it is, you have opportunities, right? This is the challenge, is we so badly want to think about groups. So in a campus ministry, you have a night that you bring people together. So it's very easy to focus on what do we do on that night. But that focus is group focused. Like, how do we get more students to show up? And that's great if they do, but the real work is, how am I doing this in my non-gathering opportunities? Am I just meeting with somebody for coffee? Am I sitting down with somebody and chatting? It can be focused on class. I've got this class with somebody and we meet up and we study. Okay, that's an evangelization opportunity. If you're together an hour and 55 minutes of it is focused on the topic that you're studying, and 5 minutes is you just reflecting faith in some way, that's very powerful. That's a very solid strategy. And so when I think about who's closest, so you're leaders in this, at the next level of people you have influence over, there are students that participate more than others. And so one of your questions is, at that next level, with the students that participate more, how do we as leaders help them engage, not just when they come to our gatherings, but how do we help them engage with their friends and classmates? Because they have contact with somebody that none of you have contact with. And so you're helping them be that person away from the gatherings that you have, then you're being effective as a campus ministry, because we're deploying more people, so to speak, into all the nooks and crannies of the campus, right? And so that's where you're thinking. That's where spheres of influence, the baseball diamond, can be helpful. We have an influence on this group, so let's help this group more strategically reach the next group, which is their friends or whoever they meet. You know, that's part of college, is you're meeting new people all the time because of classes and shared projects and neighbors and dorms or whatever. And so how do we help the people that are coming to us to engage that a little bit more?
Kind of just a side question. What do you think of what groups? I mean, like when you sphere of influence, are you talking more to people that like you're just kind of always bumping shoulders with, or can that even be something? I guess it might fall under strategy, but that you seek out groups that you know you can.
I'd say both. Yeah, it's partly
with.
both. Okay, so there are. So to use an example in the school, so I'm giving a talk to all the superintendents in the United States in October, and so I'm thinking like, okay, so what I have to think about is how to help them see their sphere of influence. So one group they have influence over is all the principals in their schools, right? Like that's the bumping shoulders with. A superintendent gathers the principals, they all have to come. However, beyond the fact that they have to come and listen to me, we all know that a superintendent knows that among all the principals in their school, a few of them are on track with them. And that those that are on track with them, when they share something, those people, they respond. So in my case, okay, so I can call all the priests of the diocese together, and they have to come, and I'm going to rub shoulders with them, and I'm going to share something with them, but they're not going to all receive it equally. There are going to be some that are really on track with me, like whatever I perceive to be something that should be addressed, some of them are all on board, like yes. And so I have within that sphere, I have a more direct sphere on a few. Okay, so the other students that come to your gatherings every week. Okay, so in a certain level, you have some influence over all of them because they come. But within that group, they don't all respond equally. There are some that are just happy to be there, some just looking for social, but some that are trying to grow. And so that's part of what you have to do. You have an influence, and so how you program the gathering is based on the influence in terms of what do they need. But then within that group of people that shows up, you're trying to identify a few that are a little closer. And so I have to give some extra attention to them. So I need the program that brings them all together. And then I have to, outside of the program, try to bump a little bit more with the people that are paying closer attention, that are on track with me. Okay, so it's some of both. Does that make sense? Okay, this is true at this is helpful. That's why these are business practices. This isn't just church stuff, right? This is true at every level of everything. Okay, when you get a job, this is going to still be true. Okay, if you're a superior at work, there are certain people that have to listen to you, but within that group, there's only going to be a few that really share your vision. If you're going to be effective at work, you have to be conscious of these dynamics. And so this is just human reality that we're applying because it also helps understand the religious dynamic of people. Other questions? Okay, so this is the other thing I wanted to share with you today. So when I say that part of the strategy is that we have to focus first on who's closest. Well, the real starting point for that strategy is you have to focus on yourself. That's the real starting point. You can't give what you don't have. So if you want to have an influence for another person about faith, you have to keep building up your faith. That's true for all of us. Like once I get to be bishop, that doesn't mean I'm done on the growing in faith train, right? Like I have to keep growing in faith, because ultimately God's plan is what we're trying to carry out. And God is using us, even though we're us and we're not very good at what God needs. God could do it much better if he didn't bother with us. And yet he wants to bother with us for some mysterious reason. Okay, so the starting point is us. So then you have to then spend time looking at yourself to say, well, what moves me really? And how can I maximize that experience? Because while it might be good to experience God in these other ways, ultimately, God made me so that my transcendental moves me. So God is the one that made me this way. And so if I take advantage of that and I provide more opportunities for that, well, what happens is I become more and more convinced of the transcendence of God. I have to become more and more convinced that what God is doing is real and powerful. Now, we don't have time to talk about this today, but another question you have to ask in strategy, and I can give this to you as a question for your discussion, is that we have to ask, what biases are we facing? If we don't take seriously the bias in front of me, then I'm likely going to fail. And by bias, I don't just mean negative. I just mean, like, what do they already think to be? Okay, that can be the wrong thing, it can be negative, it could be the right thing, but we have to account for what's the bias of the person in front of me. Now here's an example of a bias that I think causes major problems in our society. And this is true for religious people who go to church every week and people who don't care. Okay, I think there's very few people who really believe that the spiritual is real. Okay, now that can be hard to grasp when I say that about church-going people. But there's a lot of church-going people who don't really believe that the spiritual is real. What they believe is that, yes, there's a God, but God is distant and kind of the end of the journey. I believe in God, and what I believe about God is that God's up there in heaven. And one of these days, if I don't commit too many sins, I'll be up there with God. But that they don't believe that God is active and at work, really, in the journey. God's the end of the journey. But they don't really believe that God is part of the journey. Okay, that's a bias I believe is very strong. Obviously strong in those who reject religion, but also stronger than we realize with people who go to church on Sundays. And so there's various ways I hear this betrayed, so to speak, if you pay attention. So for example, where I see this happen frequently is that people face real hardship in their life. And whenever they come across a hardship, it could be financial, it could be the death in a family, it could be an illness. What do people do? They search for a solution to the problem, right? And when they can't fix the problem, then what do people say? Well, all I can do is pray. They say they'll pray because they've exhausted all the things they think will really help. And if I can find a solution that's not praying and it fixes it, I don't bother to pray. Because somewhere deep inside of me, I'm not convinced that that really makes a difference. Okay, I pray, I go to Mass, I say my prayers, but I'm not convinced that really matters. And so I think that this is a major bias, so that when we are talking about people to try to move them in faith, there's a struggle to believe that the work of God is real, instead of either thinking, well, it doesn't exist at all, or it exists, it's just the end goal. Tell me about real life, people will say. Okay, people dismiss religion and they'll say, well, you're just interested in religion because you can't deal with real life. Okay, so this bias is common, and so when I say there's a bias, you have to identify what can be there, and then you have to listen for it. You have to pay attention. Because when there is a bias like that, then the strategy has to account for that. Okay, if I'm saying this thing up here and I realize there's a bias down here and I ignore it, well, this up here is never going to be successful. So here's an example. A fundamental truth of faith is that God is love and desires a relationship with you. Okay, that's a fundamental truth. God is love and desires a relationship with you. So the bias question is, does the person I'm talking to believe that? Because if they don't believe it, well, every argument I give based on that, they're not going to track with. Okay, whether it is an argument in the sense of truth, or whether it's, let's go on this mission trip to see God in the poor. If I don't believe that God is love and wants a relationship, well, why bother with that? Okay, so this is crucial, I think, because it's also a normal part of development. So think about how you progress in your life. When you're a little kid and people start telling you about God, well, you just absorb it, right? When we're 5, we're like, fantastic, God loves me, let's sing our songs, it's all beautiful, it's all real, like it's not fake. We accept it because at that age, we're ready to accept it. We're oblivious at that point to all the things that could challenge it for most people. What challenges it for most people is how bad the world is. And so some 5-year-olds, unfortunately, are very exposed to how bad the world is, but many of us are not. So we just absorb all of that. Well, it doesn't take much longer, say 5 more years, now we're 10, where we start to become aware that there's bad stuff in the world. Like all of a sudden I'm aware that when we're out of school because there's a hurricane and a bunch of people died. Like, I didn't know that when I was 5. Now I'm 10 and I'm like, oh my gosh, we were out of school today, but a bunch of people died. And there's this war. And then I learn about my parents are fighting or whatever. So now I start to become exposed to the problems in the world. So then come back to the question, God is love and wants a relationship with me. Do I believe that? That's a lot harder to believe when I've experienced evil in the world. And so at age 10, we have a tendency to start questioning, is that true? And if someone can provide a real answer to that question, we take a big step in maturity. Like, okay, that makes sense to me. Like, those bad things can happen and God can still be real. But if no one answers that question, then I conclude, well, there isn't really an answer to that question. And so quickly, I can check out. So if you look at the statistics about people abandoning the faith, you often don't notice they've abandoned the faith until they get old enough to stop going to church. But many of those people will report that they stopped really believing when they were like 11 or 12. Because they came into conflict with the things they always believed and they didn't get a satisfactory response, and so they concluded this isn't real. So there's that question. God is love and invites me to a relationship with him. If that's not real, I have to be convinced of that. Or else I'm not going to take any more steps from here. Which is why many people reject it. And even if that happens at age 11, fast forward 10 years to age 21, they still have to have the answer to that question. If they don't get the answer to that question at age 21, they're still not going to move forward in anything having to do with faith. And so we have to step back in our strategies and help them answer that question. God is real and invites me into a relationship with him. This is where the Transcendentals can help. Because if I'm not convinced by the arguments about God, well, maybe when I'm put in a missionary experience and I see the poor and I see the joy that they bring despite their hardship, I suddenly now, my bias is questioned. My bias that all this religion stuff isn't real, all of a sudden that's called into question. Because if it's not real, how can this person suffering so much be so happy? And I'm not sure what to do with that. Okay, so this is part of conversion.
So is that kind of the goal? Is not to change someone's bias, but I mean, obviously that is the goal, but more so to question it.
Yeah, right.
It,
Absolutely.
and then
No, that's a great way to think about it. That's why these biases are so important, right? If somebody's not tracking with you, and you're trying to figure out what to say, and nothing you're saying seems to matter, probably you're not correct about what their bias is. You're answering a question they're not asking. And so you have to step back and say, well, what are they asking really? And very often when somebody has rejected faith, well, the sticking point, the question they're asking, has to do with some pain they experienced. And if they're stuck on this pain, well, then all the beautiful things about faith that you're telling them, that's not going to help them. Because they still have the bias that, well, that might be true for you, but why did God let this happen to me? And if God let this happen to me, none of that can be true. Fine for you, but you haven't experienced what I've experienced, right? So whenever you find yourself not connecting the way you want, almost guaranteed that you're not answering the right question. And so you got to step back and try to discover. Maybe they don't even know what question they're asking, right? You have to help discover what the question is. So as an example of this, I have a friend who was a junior high religion teacher. And in the junior high religion class, the question of the church is teaching about marriage came up, the question about annulments. So if you get divorced, then what? And so the church teaches about annulments. And so this guy was trying very hard to be compassionate and pastoral and not just say, here's the rule, but to kind of lay it out there. And he had this kid that just got very angry that he was teaching this. And so then he tried to explain it to the kid, and he didn't make any headway. Because he was trying to explain why the church teaches what it teaches. A couple of years later, he had another opportunity to sit down with this kid, now outside of the context of teacher in front of a classroom. And as he talked to this kid said, why did my dad leave my mom? So he was asking, well, why does the church teach this about annulments? But that wasn't his question, really. And so as long as the teacher was trying to answer that question, he wasn't making any headway because that wasn't really the question. The question was, why did my dad do this thing? This man that I was supposed to trust and was supposed to care for us and was supposed to love my mom, he failed. How can that happen? That's his question. And so whatever the church teaches about this, it's not even that he disagrees with it. It's that it doesn't address the pain he's feeling. And until that's addressed, there's this huge wall in front of him. And so learning strategies and learning about transcendentals can help, because maybe that person is so stuck in this pain. But if they have an experience of beauty or goodness, suddenly it melts their heart a little bit. And so that's why we have to be conscious of this. Okay, so I want to end with 4 kind of quick biblical examples of this dynamic that I would suggest you bring to your own prayer as a way to think about this. So that point of pain, which often revolves around sin, and how we move past that pain. So there's 2 men and 2 women from Scripture. Okay, the first man is Matthew. The second man is fictional, the prodigal son. In both cases, they came up against this obstacle that was the result of sin. The 2 women are the woman at the well and the woman caught in adultery. In all 4 cases, 2 men, 2 women, they came into contact with sin. And all of them suffered the consequences of that sin. And all of them were trapped by that sin. So now, think about the response that brought change in them. All 4 of those came into contact with God. Okay, 3 of them, Matthew and the woman in adultery, the woman at the well, came literally into contact with Jesus. The son came into contact with the Father, who of course represents God in the story. And so in every case, what moved them was not explaining why the things they did were wrong. In every case, the only thing that moved them was Jesus pointing to himself. He said to Matthew, "Follow me." He didn't say to Matthew, "I got a deal for you. If you'll abandon all your sin, you can walk a path that will fulfill your life." That's not what he said. He said, "Follow me." To the woman caught in adultery, she didn't expect to encounter Jesus at all. They drug her out there in front of the crowd. The crowd turned on her and said, "Teacher, this woman deserves to be stoned to death. She was caught in the very act of committing adultery." And Jesus doesn't argue with her at all. Jesus says, of course, "Let the one who has no sin cast the first stone." And all of them disappeared because they were aware of their sin. Picture that woman. Like, picture this biblical verse. The crowd is all walking away. Jesus bends back down on the ground. How hard would it have been for that woman to disappear? Easy. She could have disappeared and that would have been the end of it. She's the only one that stayed. Everybody now admitted they all had sin. All of them admitted that they needed the mercy of God. Only the woman stayed and received it. And Jesus didn't explain why adultery is wrong. He didn't spend any time at all on the behavior that needed to be corrected. He simply said, "Nor do I condemn you. Come to me." What happened, it's not that the sins don't matter. It's that we can only deal with the sin in the light of Christ. If we try to deal with the sin by reasoning through why the sin is a problem, we don't get there. But what happens when we come face to face with Jesus is that the blinding light of Jesus makes us see the sin for what it is really, and suddenly we don't want it anymore. So it's coming into contact with Jesus. Now, the woman at the well, I want to share with you specifically some of the scriptural interaction in this. Just the beginning of the verse, okay? So, of course, Jesus arrives in this town in Samaria. So Samaritans were the most hated people. And he sends the apostles away to go get food in the town because he knows that woman is going to be there. And so the woman is there getting her water, and Jesus goes up to greet her. So I want you to think about what I've already said in light of this encounter. So first of all, he invites her to know him. But also keep in mind that there is this bias that the spiritual is not real. So think about what happens is the woman is there to get water, and what does Jesus say? Like, "I'll give you living water," right? And what does she say? "Well, you don't even have a bucket." And then Jesus kind of convinces her that he can actually do this, and she says, "Well, great, if this happens, I don't have to keep coming back here and getting more water." So even in the middle of this interaction with Jesus, her first thought is very practical. It's not spiritual. It's fix this thing. Get a bucket, make it where I don't have to come here and get water anymore. That's all she's after. But that is not at all what Jesus is offering. And she only shifts when she realizes that the spiritual is real. Because he offers her living water. And what is the living water? It's not an endless bucket sitting at your house. It's something else entirely that you can't quite grasp, right? Like it's impossible to put the living water into concrete terms. And the more you try to put it into concrete terms, the more you'll be frustrated. However, even without that, it's very real. And so the question is, well, what does it mean to say that the water, the living water that he offers the Samaritan woman, what does it mean to say that's real? That's a hard question. What does it mean to say that is real? Because her first reaction is very practical, but that's not what Jesus means. Okay, so this is not a question I can answer for you. This is a question you have to answer for yourself. And so starting with yourself, this is a huge question. Is what does it mean to say that what God offers to me is real when it's not tangible in the way I'm used to? So let's look at this brief encounter. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." The Samaritan woman said, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share such things in common with Samaritan." And Jesus answered her. Now pay attention to the answer of Jesus. If you knew the gift of God, if you knew the gift of God. So he's hearing all of her objections. He already knows she's committed all these sins. That hasn't come up yet. But he knows her sins. He knows her struggles. He hears her voice. And what he says is, if you knew. Well, that can be spoken to all of us. We don't have to be a woman married to 5 husbands and then we're not married with the guy we're with now for that to be true. It's true. Because none of us have tapped into fully what God is offering. True for me, true for you. The Transcendentals bring us into a contact with God. They open up for us a possibility to encounter the real. If you knew. And so this is the starting point. Okay? In your prayer, picture that. Like when Jesus says to you, if you only knew the gift that God was given to you. Our prayer should be, God, what am I missing? Like obviously I'm missing something here. What am I missing? He wants you to know it because as the story goes on, the woman will know. At the beginning of the encounter, he says to her, if you only knew. At the end of the encounter, she changes everything about her life because she knows. But it takes a little bit of time. If you only knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, then you would say to me, then you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. And then she says, well, you don't even have a bucket. Like, how's that even possible? So Jesus stays with her when she asks all the questions. This doesn't make sense. How can this be? Jesus stays with that point, if you only knew. If you only knew, you would have asked me for living water. And no matter how many objections she gives, he stays there. If you only knew, you would have asked me for living water. And he stays there until she realizes, oh, that's what you mean. And now she wants the living water. Okay, there's one other detail that I want to point out. Okay, so as this goes, then, of course, Jesus says, go call your husband. She says, I have no husband. Jesus acknowledges her sin at that point. It says, then Jesus points her to this beautiful, powerful encounter. And then she says, you know, I know my religion. I know that the Messiah was coming, he says. And then he says, I'm the one. I'm the Messiah that you're waiting for. Okay, then the disciples come back. And it says, in verse 28, this is John 4, verse 28. Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. That little detail is crucial. She was only focused on getting water, so she didn't have to keep coming back to this well all the time. And when she gets it, she abandons her pitcher because she realizes, oh, that was never what I needed. She completely lets go of what she thought she had to have because she realizes the spiritual is real. She abandons the physical container of water because now she has understood what it means to receive living water. That's the challenge for us. What is it that we need to leave behind so that we can receive living water? That's an answer that's different for every one of us. And if you're going to have a strategy to help other people, the first thing that has to happen is you better appreciate what living water really means, so that you're in contact with the transcendental reality of God. When that happens, your life becomes attractive, and the words you speak have the power of Jesus to change lives. Yes, you started to ask something.
When you say they know the spiritual is real, I mean, is that, when you say spiritual, like the immaterial, like, or just
No. It means what is it? The question is, it means what is living water?
That's what you mean.
That's what I mean.
Realizing the spiritual is real.
Because when Jesus says, "I will give you living water," is living water real? Is it real? Of course, right?
Yeah.
But what does that mean? Okay, it's real. I can know it's real. But what does that mean, actually? I can't answer that question for you, right? Like, you have to answer that question for yourself. And it won't be answered in any kind of traditional way. And when you answer the question, what you will discover is that you're incapable of explaining to someone else what it means. Okay, this is part of the reality. When the spiritual is real, we come into contact with it and we know it at the core of who we are, and we're incapable of explaining it to someone else, because my explanation isn't the explanation they need. It's my explanation. Okay? Many of us have experiences of the transcendental where we are deeply moved by something. And then we try to tell someone else about that experience and they don't understand. And we're frustrated because they don't understand. It's impossible to explain it. That's what transcendent means. It's beyond. Transcendent means beyond. And so it's beyond my capacity to put it into words because it's God. There's no way, it's impossible for me to convey God to you. And so the question of this is, what do I believe living water is real? And if I say yes, what does that even mean? And we need to work through that, not so we can explain it to someone else, but so that we're convicted by it. Matthew, the prodigal son, the woman caught in adultery, the woman at the well, radically changed their lives because they came to believe that living water was real. But Scripture doesn't tell us at all how they explained what that meant. This woman in the well went back to the town and she convinced all of them. And then they came to meet Jesus, and he spent 3 days with them. And in the end of this story, it says, they tell the woman, "We don't need your witness anymore because we have come to believe on our own." Because they came into contact with Jesus. They experienced living water. So when I say that the spiritual is real, I mean living water is real. But I can't explain to you how living water is real. Only God can make that a conviction strong enough to actually guide your life. Other questions I can't answer. Okay, well then why don't we conclude with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God, in your presence here and now, we recognize your invitation, your offer of living water. Help us to drink deeply of that living water. Give us the hearts that are ready to respond to your invitation, to follow the example of many saints and sinners before us who have come to know the transcendent power of your presence in the world. Help us discover, first of all, this living water in our own lives, and then fill our buckets so that as we encounter other people, we may draw them into the mystery of your life and love. You have entrusted to us this work, the care of souls, your heart for your people. Help us to work well, to understand the way that you lead us. Give us your Spirit so that all of our efforts may bear fruit according to your will. And I ask your blessing on these students, on these who are working to care for your beloved children. Make their efforts fruitful and refresh them always in the living water that you give to them. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.